Major funding for these broadcasts has been provided by grants from New York Community Bank, AmTrust Title Insurance Company, Perfect Building Maintenance, M&T Bank, Customers Bank, Marks Paneth LLP, Capital One Bank, Collins Building Services, Meridian Capital Group. Additional support has been provided by grants from AKA Hotel Residences Corman Communities, Ariel Property Advisors, Amerant Bank, Bank of America Merrill Lynch, Briarwood Organization, Chase Commercial Mortgage Lending, Chase Commercial Term Lending, Citizens Bank, Dime Community Bank, Douglaston Development Levine Builders, Flushing Bank, Friedman LLP, Handro Properties LLC, Handler Real Estate Organization, Hodges Ward Elliott INC, Investors Bank, James D. Kuhn Real Estate Institute at Syracuse University, John Casamatides Red Apple Group, Keysight Capital Partners, Matone Group, New Banks, Newmark Knight Frank, Ocean First Bank, Optimum Window Manufacturing Corp., People's United Bank, Rockefeller Group, Rosewood Realty Services, Stonehenge NYC, SVN CPEX Real Estate Services, Tierra CRG, the Marengo Family Foundation, and these friends. Good afternoon. My name is Michael Stoller, host of the Stoller Report and moderator for the AmTrust Title webinar series. Stephen Napolitano, Senior Executive Vice President of the AmTrust Title. Today, the topic of discussion is the hospitality industry, an industry in a crisis today. My guests today include Brendan Keating, who is the Administrative Vice President, Specialty Financing with M&T Bank. Larry Corman, who is President of AKA Residences and co-CEO of Corman Communities. We have Dilip Pettigera.
That's correct.
Okay, who's the CEO of Access Point Capital. And last but not least, we have Ben Davison, who's the Hotel Asset Management and Acquisitions for RFR Holdings. So where's occupancy today? What's happening? Larry, you're the ultimate optimist. Where do you see the hospitality market today?
I'm very bullish. I think there's going to be great new opportunities. I think a product like what we offer is going to resonate in the near future. When we got out of the recession, more people were willing to take a chance on AK, which was not known. So I'm very bullish about the future. The properties where we've done the longer lane stays have benefited. They're reaping those dividends. So we have some properties in the 65 to 85% occupancy. Other properties in Philadelphia and New York where we just experienced our lowest season, which is Q1, we didn't have the same base, so we're in that 25 to 35% range. But we're really battling to keep everybody working, and we are hopeful that the city opens back up in May.
Ben, you have luxury hotels in New York and around the world. Where do you see your marketplace?
Yeah, I mean, right now we're mostly shut down. I mean, largely, we have a lot of mixed-use properties with some condo components, so those are still open and operating. And we still have staff to service those residents. Maybe not quite as bullish on the rebound as Larry, but we're hopeful that leisure is one of the segments that comes back faster than some of the other segments. So we're optimistic that those markets will rebound quickly. But as of now, we're mostly, just humming along and trying to manage expenses the best we can, and with low occupancies.
Brennan, as the banker, what percentage of your portfolio would you say made the April payments?
Of our portfolio, I would say 1/3 of our portfolio made the April payment. 2/3 did not. But even the ones that did not, or the ones that did, we were still offering some relief to them. It's just that was it some timing issues, and some of them still had the cash flow to be able to support it.
Dilip, and you're an intermediary, you provide intermediary financing with people. Where are your clients today? How are they reacting to the market? And are they asking for forbearance in their loans today?
Yeah, I mean, just a point of clarification, we're actually direct balance sheet lenders. We've touched base with virtually our entire portfolio. We've talked to all of our borrowers. We are offering them, based on what their needs are, depending on the loan type as well. Whether it was a loan for FF&E, those loans typically amortize over the useful life of the equipment. So in those cases, just making a modification to the loan to permit a waiver of the principal for a 90-day period where they can continue to pay interest, that's feasible for them. Or other loans, particularly on the acquisition with a reposition, we have a mortgage component on it, then in those cases, we are looking at either interest only or doing some sort of 90-day deferment. We're taking it on a case-by-case basis and looking at it on a 90-day window, and then we'll reevaluate 90 days from now what their needs are, depending on where they're located and whether those markets, start reopening.
Okay, the big question is 90 days is very short period of time, and it's going to take a little longer for most things to reopen. Do you see the banks extending the opportunities to 6 months deferral of interest and perhaps 3 to 6 months deferral on principal payments? Because otherwise, I'm not certain too many of these properties can pay off the debt.
Well, at least for M&T, we're looking at these, we're giving, 90 days for many of our loans. However, we acknowledge that 90 days likely will not be sufficient, but, we're hoping 90 days from now, we're going to be able to have some more visibility into kind of how deep and how long lasting this COVID, crisis will have lasted. And then once we have a little more information, we'll be in a better position to know kind of how to modify for any additional term that we would need to.
Ben?
Yeah, we're seeing most of our lenders in the same boat, trying to give us some runway, pretty much 90-day forbearance with cash sweeps thereafter to try and get that debt service paid back as quickly as possible. And most of our close relationship banks have been pretty accommodating, understanding this is unprecedented times, and that we all need to get some runway to figure out exactly what the world's going to look like and can manage from there.
So, let's talk about the world where it's going to look like. Right now, I've been reading in the paper, the hotels which are open are spending probably double or triple the expense they did on cleaning and sanitizing the rooms. It's taking longer to move somebody from one room to another room because you want to make sure it's protection. How are you in the hotels that you're operating today operating to handle the coronavirus pandemic?
Well, partly we were spending double or triple because we have local 6 and residences. But beyond that, I think similar to when bed bugs hit New York, we've always resonated with those who want quality, design, presentation, cleanliness. So cleanliness has been a hallmark of the AK brand. And I think what you're going to see is people are going to care a lot more about that. And it's not going to be up to the government to decide when people stay. It's going to be when people feel comfortable staying. And I think where they go, and I think it'll be more quality than quantity travel. So when they stay, they may stay longer, and I think they may stay at a higher level. So I think it's going to be an opportunity for us to have more people willing to try AK or stay with a group that they believe is going to really protect them.
One of the comments that was written up the other day on extended stay, that many people are very happy with extended stay. It's a segment of the market that's doing well, and some of the major players are looking to put money into the extended stay. Ben?
Yeah, I was just going to piggyback. I agree with everything Larry's saying. I think that the brand component to this around cleanliness and getting consumers from a psychological perspective comfortable with staying is going to be a huge factor with getting people back into your property. I mean, you saw today and yesterday, Marriott released their new global standards for cleanliness. And, I think that's going to be a huge component to reopening and getting people back into your property.
There was a discussion, and it was also written up in your paper, the Philadelphia Inquirer, talking about construction loans for hotels. There were a number of construction loans in process in various stages. Are these construction loans going to continue, or do you think the properties are just going to be dormant until the world becomes a different world. Brennan, you're the banker.
Well, I mean, we have a number of construction loans that were halted due to, regional requirements. So what our expectation is that once these cities and municipalities open back up again, we will continue to be funding those construction loans. We know that, we're going to have to push out construction completion dates and some of those as well, and kind of, the opening of the hotels, and we've already started that process. But we fully intend to continue to funding on those projects.
One of the biggest topics over the last couple of years in the hospitality business has been Airbnb, Lyric, Verbo, and the other alternative entities over there, and Sounder. How do you see these entities reacting in the future?
I think they'll ultimately and eventually do well. I think there will be this question, both based on regulations from the Jersey City vote that happened pre-corona time, but I think there's just going to be an overall question about staying in somebody's apartment versus staying at a brand where they know that there's systems in place to deal with some of these things. So that might be an 18-month versus beyond that, but I think there's a way in which everybody can partner together through distribution, through programming, through management. But I think there will be this, especially within urban cities, dense populations, this desire for something that they know to be, they have that credibility that it's going to be contained and controlled and clean.
Which I think is evident by the Sounder and the Lyric approach, because they're really renting apartments for the entire apartment as opposed to sharing a portion of the apartment over there.
Some of these younger companies were getting so much cash because of the technology, and I think you are going to see a flight towards more established companies that have the breadth and depth of experience similar to Corman Communities and some others. But I think that technology component will resonate, but maybe in a different way.
The one concern, though, with those companies is most of them were appealing to landlords because they offered a fixed, sort of lease structure to come into your property. The question is going to be after this, many more months of this, are they going to be capitalized enough where there's anything behind these lease payments, so you're just taking a flyer on them? And let's remember, a lot of these were spin-offs that were supported by Airbnb, like Lyric. So it's going to be interesting to see if they still have the capital to weather this. And I agree with Larry's point that I just think the consumer is going to have a tough time getting comfortable going into, a random person's apartment with no idea on the cleanliness standards, and maybe they're going to flight back to some of the brands and known product.
Also, if you think apartments have done very well in New York, if you own an apartment, would you take 2 floors right now and give it to somebody that's not as stable as a 1-year lease?
Definitely. Vail Resorts recently issued their financial results saying that they did poorly. Disneyland said they may not open up until 2021. Dilip, you did a wonderful financing in Aurora, Colorado, near the Gaylord property. What do you see with regard to the resort properties when they return, and what the changes will be in the processing of handling people at these resorts? Brennan, you used to have a major resort property, the Roosevelt in New Orleans also.
Well, I think, the resort properties, there will be, at least in the short term, there's going to be enhanced procedures to check in. There's going to be, as Ben talked about, just similar to what Marriott just rolled out in terms of cleanliness programs, there'll be enhanced programs for that. I think the F&B outlets may not be operating as they did in the past, if at all. They'll go to some other limited touch and limited contact type service. And I think that you're going to see that, starting at the resort level, but then also working its way down, where, you start limiting the touch in the rooms. And, you'll have to kind of figure out how you, in the short term, even reconfigure that space, particularly when a lot of these brands and a lot of these chains were going towards activating more of that public space for having people kind of mingle there and provide, whether it's a coffee offering or a bar offering or something else. So it'll be interesting to see where that shakes out. But, the resort properties will certainly, start there. And the key will be the beds and heads. And then that will start, as time progresses, then maybe they'll be able to provide additional amenities and services that you're typically used to seeing What'll be interesting is what rate will they be charging for that, because you're not getting that same level of touch at it that you were probably obviously pre-COVID.
For these resort hotels too, it's going to be what kind of guests they're going to have. So I mean, most of the people I've spoken with, it seems to be the consensus is the leisure market will be probably the first one to come back, and specifically the drive to leisure. So the ones that have that sort of clientele are going to probably come back quickest. But for some of these resorts that can't rely on that, or have a greater reliance on group business, which I think will probably be the last to recover, they're going to have a prolonged stress for looking at years more than just months.
Here's a question that, I mean, Ben just brought it up, and I think Dilip included it, is the subject of F&B in the restaurants within the hotels. Many of the restaurants will have to change their proximity, their social distancing, the number of people. Bars, the Moxie, who did very well in New York City because of the Tao effect and everything else, it's going to change. How do you see, and in many of your hotels, part of the business was tied in to the fact that you had this fancy restaurant or this luxury type of lifestyles. How do you see that affecting the future of the hospitality industry?
We've actually, one of our restaurants at aka Rittenhouse Square provides meals to our residents because it's a full residence with a full kitchen. Sometimes they're just providing them utensils or ingredients. We have Samsung TVs that allow them to do nutrition and cooking and fitness. So I think one of the things you're going to see is more home offices, people working from home. So we're putting a greater emphasis on our lighting and some elements like that, but then also this ability to cook in your own home and not have the pressure to go out for each meal. So we're looking at how food and beverage around us, not just in our buildings, but around us, can complement that.
And you, in your New York City hotels, you have very fine restaurants. What do you see happening over there?
Yeah, I mean, let's be honest, and hopefully none of my tenants are listening, but they're a critical component to the success of the property, especially on lifestyle hotels. We're optimistic that, especially in New York, that as things settle down, that the normal will come back. And I do think you're going to see an increased demand for, potentially room service and cleanliness if you're packaging it correctly. So we're hopeful that we can get these guys back up and running, but look, there's certainly going to be challenges. There are challenges with getting labor back up, back and providing working capital for these restaurants to get back up and running.
One of the topics that always takes place over the financing, when people were looking at hotels and at restaurants, it's a day-to-day operation. The income changes by the day. There are balance sheet lenders like M&T Bank, Bank of America, who's been lending. Then there's been the CMBS market, and then there's been the EB5 and alternative financings. Who do you see in the future being a leading lender in this market? And do you see the EB5s, who is really a subordinate lender of foreign money, continuing to have a business in the U.S.? Ben, have you used EB5 financing?
Yeah, no, we have not actually played a huge amount on the EB5 side, but look, most of it is tied to construction. I think that you're going to see, obviously, new construction starts significantly decline given the risk of hospitality assets and the ramp up right now. So I think EB5 is going to be significantly diminished in the hotel front. I mean, it probably will continue in other asset classes, but if you're asking specifically about EB5, I think it's going to pretty much be non-existent because it's hand in hand with construction.
Philip or Brennan?
I mean, we've done some EB5 projects historically. I think that the answer to that question is really tied, also to kind of immigration policy and where the dollar amount is for the initial investment in exchange for the green card, if you will. But in terms of construction projects, of the ones that we had on our books that we were lending to, are still continuing to lend to, those projects continue unless there's a regional shutdown, if you will, for construction. And as Brennan talked about, we evaluate that and then the delivery point of it and how that impacts the interest reserve. But for going forward projects, I mean, we will look selectively at some new construction projects. Certainly, it's harder to underwrite, particularly on a valuation basis. As complete and as stabilized. But we're looking at those in terms of probably lower leverage going into the property, and certainly maybe underwriting a little bit more restrictively in terms of debt service coverage than we may have historically, and really focused on the sponsor's ability to cover costs and if they're close to opening a property, then certainly their first year of debt service coverage, if you will, or interest payments as the property's ramping up. Certain properties you mentioned, Aurora, Colorado, that we had financed, that property's almost open, and they're kind of slowed it because certainly they don't want to open in this environment, but they may in the next 60 days or so decide to open that property. So they at least had that short-term advantage in terms of not having to close the property, and once they do open, then they'll open fresh. So I answered a few questions there, but
It did.
hope it made sense.
Yeah. And from M&T's perspective, I mean, on construction, I mean, a lot of it's going to come down to how long and how deep this downturn is. So, I mean, we're not really looking at any new construction for hotels right now. I don't think anybody probably is. But once the kind of dust settles and the smoke clears, we're going to kind of see where we are. And we may do things selectively. There's some markets which maybe oversupplied coming out of this. New York is likely to be one of them. I think there's probably going to be a number of hotels that may not reopen. So we're going to kind of just have to see what the landscape looks like coming out of this. And for M&T, all of the clients that we would be lending to for hotel construction are owners and operators of other hotels. So we're going to have to see how impacted, what their situation looks like coming out of this as well, because they will be put in a situation where they're going to be carrying these properties for some time. And if there has been any, deferment of debt service, that deferment is going to need to be repaid for any other distributions go back to those ownerships. So that's going to impact their cash flow going forward as well, which we look at as a key factor for, underwriting on those construction loans. So there's a lot still to be figured out during this for us for construction. So it's going to be some time probably till we're seriously considering anything.
We have to leave at this time, and we'll return next week.